Introduction: Who I am and what happened. I've always considered myself a pretty reasonable person. I'm not the kind of neighbor who throws loud parties or lets my grass grow knee-high. I pay my dues, keep to myself, and generally expect the same in return. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. You know the kind: picket fences, mailboxes that all look the same, and the occasional HOA newsletter stuffed into your door like a passive-aggressive reminder that your trash bins were out 10 minutes too early. For the most part, it's been a peaceful place to live. I bought my home about 6 years ago. It's modest, but it's mine. Fully paid off, no mortgage hanging over my head. The garage, though, that's my favorite part of the house. It's where I unwind, tinker, fix stuff. Nothing crazy, just hobbies. Old radios, electric bikes, even a little woodworking. Nothing noisy, nothing commercial, just me and my tools. That's why I was so caught off guard when I received a letter from the HOA. It was one of those overly formal ones, lots of bold type and legal language. According to them, I was in violation of community guidelines for unauthorized use of garage space. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the letter was meant for someone else, or maybe someone had misinterpreted what I was doing in there. So I called them. I figured I'd explain, we'd clear it up, and life would go on. Instead, I got hit with more bureaucracy than a DMV on a Monday morning. No one wanted to hear my side. One person even suggested that using the garage for anything besides parking may pose a liability. A liability? For fixing a damn lawnmower? That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the start of something bigger, and so began the war over my own garage. Why my garage is my garage? Let me make one thing clear. I own my home, including the garage, outright. No mortgage, no landlord, no shared walls, and certainly no permission slips required to use my own space. When I signed the deed, it wasn't with an asterisk that said, unless the HOA feels differently. That garage is on my property, not leased, not borrowed, not part of a communal clubhouse. Mine. What really pissed me off was the implication that I was somehow abusing the space, like I was turning it into a nightclub or a meth lab or something. Let me paint a picture for you: an old Craftsman toolbox, a second-hand workbench, a pegboard full of neatly arranged tools, a mini fridge with exactly 3 beers and a Gatorade, and maybe a half-finished RC plane. That's it. No parties, no fumes, no noise after hours. Just a guy doing guy stuff in his own damn garage. They tried to argue that the garage is intended strictly for vehicle storage. Okay. Show me where it says that in the deed. Spoiler, it doesn't. The HOA rules they kept citing were more like suggestions, loosely worded and open to interpretation. And believe me, they interpreted them however suited their little power trip. Let's get something straight. I wasn't running a business. I wasn't inviting customers over. I wasn't shipping products out of my driveway. I was fixing up an old outboard motor for my fishing boat. That's a crime now? Because apparently, to the HOA, it is. Funny thing is, some of the very same board members who complained about my improper use store their Christmas decorations in their garages all year. One even has a treadmill set up like a little home gym. But I'm the problem? Nah. This wasn't about rules, this was about control. And if there's one thing I don't do well with, it's petty people trying to control what I do with what's mine. First pressure, fines and notices. A couple of weeks after that first warning letter, things escalated, fast. I got another envelope from the HOA, this time certified mail. Inside, a notice of violation and a $250 fine for non-compliance with community standards. Apparently, continuing to use my garage for unauthorized purposes, aka working on a lawnmower, was now considered a punishable offense. At this point, I was still trying to play it cool. I wrote a formal letter back, explaining in detail that I wasn't running a business, wasn't disturbing the peace, and wasn't violating any explicit rule listed in their bylaws. I even attached photos showing the inside of the garage. Nothing but basic tools, no signage, no customers, no income. Just a normal workspace. No response. A few days later, another fine. $250. Same violation. Then came the threats. If I didn't remedy the issue, they'd escalate to legal action and report me to the city. I checked. The city had no issues with what I was doing. My zoning allowed personal hobby use. Everything was legal. The only people who had a problem were the HOA board members, some of whom, by the way, had their own rule-breaking habits if you looked close enough. I tried one more time. I called their office, asked to speak to the head of the compliance committee. A woman answered, polite but robotic. She kept repeating, "It's about uniform standards. We want everyone to be treated equally." Right, except equal apparently meant selectively enforcing rules against people they didn't like. That was the last straw. They weren't interested in facts. They didn't care that I wasn't disturbing anyone. It wasn't about violations. It was about power. And they were trying to bully me into submission with paperwork, fines, and vague threats. I knew I had two choices: give in or push back. Guess which one I picked? The harassment begins. After I refused to pay the fines and made it clear I wasn't backing down, things took a turn. The HOA stopped pretending this was about rules and started playing dirty. It started small, little things that seemed coincidental at first. Someone began photographing my garage every other day. Not just the outside. They'd angle their phone just enough to peek inside if the door was open. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe just some nosy neighbor. But then the anonymous complaints started rolling in. One said I was generating excessive noise. Another claimed I was producing toxic fumes. I don't know what kind of fantasy they were imagining. I wasn't welding uranium rods. I was sanding wood and occasionally using a cordless drill. My dog makes more noise barking at squirrels. Then came the complaint about bright lighting coming from my garage late at night. You mean the single LED shop light I use when it gets dark outside? Yeah, real threat to the community. They made it sound like I was hosting some underground nightclub in there. I started to feel like I was being watched constantly. I'd come outside and find people across the street staring, whispering. A few neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. The HOA had done its job. They'd turned the neighborhood against me, or at least made it look that way. And the most insulting part? They never once approached me face to face. Everything came through passive-aggressive letters, voicemails, or hearsay. They didn't want to talk. They wanted to corner me, break me down with isolation and pressure. It was like middle school politics in adult bodies with clipboards. I realized then that this wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was personal. And if they were going to play personal, so was I. I wasn't going to yell or threaten or break anything. No, I had something better in mind, something they'd never see coming. The revenge plan begins studying the map. You know what happens when you back someone into a corner? They start thinking, planning, digging. I'm not a vengeful person by nature, but I do love a good puzzle. And the more they pushed, the more I started to notice something. Interesting. See, there's this piece of land just outside our development, not part of the HOA, technically. It's a dusty, half-paved lot that's been sitting there for years. Overgrown weeds, a few cracked parking spaces, no signage, no gate. But here's the kicker. The HOA board members loved parking there. Every time they had a meeting or didn't feel like parking in front of their own homes, that's where they went. I counted at least 7 cars on any given evening. So I got curious. Who owned that land? Surely someone must, right? I pulled the county property records. It wasn't hard. And what do you know? The lot was listed as surplus municipal property available for private purchase through the city's public land auction. It had sat untouched for over a decade. No one had bid on it. No one had claimed it. And it was up for grabs. That's when the idea started forming. What if I bought it? At first it felt petty. I wasn't sure I wanted to sink money into a piece of land just to prove a point. but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't just getting revenge. I was investing in something that gave me leverage, something that sent a message. You want to play games? Fine, I'll play smarter. So I met with a real estate attorney, went through the city's public land sale process, and filed my paperwork. No tricks, no backdoors. All by the book. 30 days later, I got the call. I was now the proud owner of a neglected little patch of pavement that just happened to be critical to the daily lives of the people who'd made mine hell, and they had no idea what was coming. Execution. Welcome to private property. About a week after I finalized the purchase, I went to work. First, I installed a few simple, no parking, private property signs. Nothing flashy, just clean, legal, and to the point. Then I put up a chain-link fence around the perimeter, not too tall, just enough to make it clear the lot was no longer public space. I even left a little gravel walkway inside just to drive the point home. Someone owns this now, someone who knows exactly what they're doing. At first, people didn't notice. A few cars still parked there, habit, I guess. So I issued polite warnings. I even left handwritten notes on windshields. This is now privately owned land. Please do not park here again. Thank you, simple. Civil. Documented. Then the HOA board caught wind. The very next day, I got a letter from them. Not about the garage this time. Now they were concerned about the impact of fencing on the visual aesthetic of the community. Seriously? Suddenly they cared about my property's visual aesthetic? These are the same people who let one guy keep a pink flamingo in his yard for 3 months. I didn't respond. Instead, I went a step further. I installed a gate with a keypad lock. No more casual drop-ins. No more unauthorized parking. And just for fun, I put up a little sign on the gate that said, "Respect private property. Before it isn't yours anymore." That's when the board members started parking 5 blocks away. I'd watch from my front porch as they trudged back and forth in the heat, clipboards in hand, clearly irritated, clearly realizing just how dependent they had been on my lot. Some neighbors asked what was going on. I just smiled and said, "Just making use of the land I legally own." No yelling, no threats, no drama, just cold, clean action. The kind of revenge you can record with a drone and set to dramatic music. And the best part? It was all 100% legal. Aftermath, their reactions and silent rage. It didn't take long for the HOA to start panicking. For the first few days, I could almost hear the gears turning in their little heads. They tried to sweep it under the rug, hoping I'd back off, but that wasn't going to happen. By the end of the week, their tone changed from passive-aggressive to outright accusatory. One of the board members, let's call her Janet, the HOA president, called me. I knew it was coming, but that didn't make it any less sweet. She demanded I take down the fence immediately and threatened to take legal action. Apparently, I was disrupting the harmony of the community. Harmony? Was she talking about the neighborhood that had turned against me just for fixing a lawnmower? I told her calmly that the land I purchased was my property. The fence was within my legal rights. I wasn't breaking any rules. She didn't want to hear it. Janet insisted I was misusing my privilege to cause a disruption. I could practically hear her fuming through the phone. It wasn't just a call. Suddenly, the HOA board was bombarding me with letters, warnings, and threats about how I was abusing my position as a homeowner and disrupting the visual and social integrity of the neighborhood. They started accusing me of intentionally targeting them, trying to destroy the community, and, get this, undermining the HOA's authority. They even suggested I was actively harassing board members. Active harassment? I hadn't even spoken to most of them in months. One letter, which I could only describe as a desperate attempt at intimidation, even accused me of setting a dangerous precedent for other residents. That's when I started laughing. They were worried that others might follow suit. That's what they were scared of. That's how deep their fear ran. But it wasn't just the board that was affected. I began hearing through the grapevine that some neighbors were starting to get annoyed, not at me, but at the HOA for their ridiculous overreach. People were starting to wonder how far the HOA was willing to go. Some had even asked, jokingly, if I would start charging parking fees. I might have actually considered it, but that was more fun in theory than in practice. So the HOA tried one last thing. They organized a community meeting. They expected me to show up, face them, and apologize for my actions. But I wasn't going to play their game anymore. Instead, I stayed home. I watched from my window as they stood in front of my now secured lot, muttering to themselves in frustration. That, right there, was priceless. Claiming justice. The community meeting didn't go as they planned, not even close. I could hear their frustration from across the street, their voices rising and falling like a bad sitcom plot. They expected me to cave, to apologize, or at the very least engage in some long-winded debate about my disruptive behavior. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I stayed quiet, kept my distance, and watched as they tried, and failed, to rally the neighborhood against me. What struck me the most was the way they tried to twist the narrative. The HOA painted themselves as the victims, the poor, beleaguered board members just trying to keep the neighborhood safe and harmonious. Meanwhile, I was the villain, a rogue homeowner, a troublemaker who was undermining the very fabric of the community. But the truth? The truth was simple. They were angry because they couldn't control me anymore. They were angry because I had turned the tables on them. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was simply exercising my rights as a homeowner. I wasn't being petty or vindictive. I was just standing up for what was mine. And that's where they lost. In the end, they didn't have a leg to stand on. They couldn't accuse me of breaking the law. They couldn't claim I was causing any actual harm to anyone. The land was mine, and I had every right to use it however I pleased. And when it came down to it, the HOA didn't have any real power over me. All their threats, all their power plays, were just that. Threats. Empty words. As the weeks went by, the HOA's grip started to loosen. They stopped sending threats. The complaints died down. They had no recourse. They couldn't force me to back down, and they couldn't get the rest of the neighborhood on their side. People started to respect the fact that I wasn't just taking a stand for my property. I was standing up to bullies. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life just because they felt like they had the upper hand. And that, in the end, felt like true justice. Not because I won in the traditional sense, but because I had proven a point. You don't get to control me just because you think you can. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was just exercising my rights. I had every right to use my space, my land, and my time however I wanted. And that wasn't up for debate. I won by simply refusing to be intimidated. The consequences, what happens now? So, where do we go from here? The HOA, after their failed attempts to regain control, quietly faded into the background. They stopped sending notices. The threats ceased. It was like they had finally realized that their authority over me was non-existent. They couldn't touch me. They couldn't bully me into submission. And most importantly, they couldn't control my property anymore. For the neighborhood, it was a turning point. There was no grand celebration, no parade in my honor. But a few neighbors started to approach me differently. Some offered a friendly wave. Others even apologized for not speaking up sooner. It turns out that a lot of people were just as fed up with the HOA's overreach as I was, but they hadn't had the courage to do anything about it. They respected what I did. They saw that standing up to the HOA wasn't about being difficult. It was about standing up for your rights, for what was just. As for me, life went back to normal. I still tinker in my garage. I still fix things and work on my little hobbies. But now, when I open my garage door, there's no one watching. There are no neighbors waiting for me to make a mistake. And best of all, the HOA doesn't send me any more letters. I know I've made my point clear. But the land, that little parking lot, it's still mine. Every few weeks, I take a stroll over there just to remind myself that I did something smart, something bold. That piece of land is now a part of my legacy. It's a reminder that no matter how small or insignificant the fight seems at the time, sometimes you need to stand your ground. There's a deeper lesson in all of this, one that's more important than just sticking it to the HOA. It's about the principle of ownership, personal rights, and the courage to stand up when someone tries to push you around. The system may try to exploit you. People in power may think they can control you, but if you're informed, if you stand firm, you can take back your space and your voice. Now, when someone asks me what happened with the HOA, I tell them, I won, but more importantly, I stood up for what was right. And that, for me, is all that matters. The conclusion, the moral of the story. As I look back on everything that happened, there's one thing I keep coming back to: the power of standing your ground. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about trying to make the HOA suffer for being obnoxious. It was about asserting my right to be left alone and to live how I saw fit. It was about the principle that no one, not an HOA, not a board of faceless administrators, gets to dictate what you do with your own property. The most powerful tool we have is our voice, our willingness to speak up when something feels wrong. The HOA wanted to control me through fear, through bureaucratic threats and vague rules. But when I stood up and said, "No, this is mine, and I'll do what I want with it," I took back that power. And here's the thing. When you take a stand, you're not just defending your space. You're defending your dignity. You're telling the world that you won't be bullied into submission. Of course, this didn't come without its challenges. It wasn't easy dealing with the letters, the fines, the accusations. But every step I took, I learned something valuable. How to read between the lines of power plays, how to navigate red tape, and how to own my decisions, literally and figuratively. What I realized is that sometimes you have to go to the edge to fully appreciate what you have. And if you don't take action, you risk losing the very thing that matters most: your freedom to live on your terms. Now I could have chosen a path of quiet submission. I could have given in to the pressure, paid the fines, apologized for a garage full of hobbies, and pretended everything was fine. But what kind of message would that have sent? That you're not allowed to use your space as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anyone. Number. That wasn't the message I wanted to send, and I'm glad I didn't. The HOA eventually backed off. They realized they couldn't make me bend to their will, and that was the moment I knew I had won. Not just the battle, but a more important victory: the right to live without fear of overreach. My neighbors now see me differently, and I've earned their respect. I may never be best friends with all of them, but at least I know I stood for something bigger than petty squabbles and bureaucracy. So the lesson here is simple. If you believe in something, stand up for it. Fight for what's yours. The world may try to control you, but in the end, it's your life, your property, and your peace of mind. And no HOA, no board of directors, no petty bureaucracy can take that away unless you let them. And if they try, well, just remember, you don't need to back down. Sometimes taking control of your own destiny is the only way to truly win.